Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian, former NFL scout and now Vice President of Football and Research at Sports Info Solutions, joined by Aaron Schatz, the godfather of football analytics and the founder of Football Outsiders. We've got our producer, Justin Stein, as always, on the controls. And today we are talking about the SIS Football Rookie Handbook 2020. And we've got two of the key guys, the two guys that really run all of the scouting that goes on throughout the book. And we'll talk a little bit about the process that goes into our very NFL-like structure of our scouting department here that these guys head up. But we've got Nathan Cooper and John Todd here. Those are the two guys that cross-checked every player in the book, and we're ready to talk about the handbook. So first of all, Aaron, how's it going?
I'm doing well. I'm kind of coming off my Super Bowl hangover.
Yeah, I'm still coming off my the whole season hangover.
Everything for the year builds up to that point, builds up to that point, and builds up to that point, and then when it's over, you're like, oh yeah, now I got to do other stuff. But the whole world opens up to all the other things that we do in the off season.
Like watch XFL?
Yeah, I didn't watch much the first week, but it got really good reviews, didn't it?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good, and that's a good time to bring in Coop and John Todd. What did you guys think of the XFL Week 1?
Yeah, thanks, Matt, again for having us. The XFL was interesting. I think it was definitely a lot better than the AAF got its start. It was some actually competitive football. So I didn't watch all the games, but bits and pieces here and there, and definitely looked pretty competitive.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Matt. Yeah, it'll be interesting if it holds up through March Madness and the Masters and all that stuff as we move forward. But so far, so good.
Yeah, I'm always down with a little bit of football. I watched one of the games. I don't know about the strength of all the different position groups. I heard whispers that they kind of went easy on getting too many defensive line players in this league because that might have been the downfall of the AAF, that the offensive lines couldn't handle them.
It was the downfall of the original XFL. The original XFL, the reason why the football was so bad was because the offensive lines were completely overwhelmed by the defensive lines.
So I think that's part of the reason why it ended up being a pretty good product in terms of just watching the games and being able to enjoy the football that was going on out there. But not very extreme. It wasn't the most extreme thing.
The only reason it's called XFL is because they did a league 19 years ago and also called that XFL. Like the whole extreme football angle is not the angle they're taking with this. If there had not been another league 19 years ago, they would have called this something else.
You got to love that even in a league where you can go for 3, down by 17, you had a team kicking a field goal.
Nope.
Point down.
Nope, nobody. They definitely. I actually talked a little bit this week with Sam Schwartzman, who does football operations for the XFL, about some of the plans that they made with the new rules. And I mean, they would like the coaches to be more aggressive. It's sort of the opposite of the NFL. In the NFL, we always worry that coaches are not aggressive, in part because they're worried about being fired because the ownership will judge them if they're aggressive and it doesn't work out. Well, in this case, the ownership is the XFL as a whole, and the ownership actually wants them to be more aggressive, very forwardly wants them to be more aggressive. That's why they made the punt rules the way they did, to make touchbacks go to the 35, to try to prevent teams from punting on 4th and short. And yet teams were generally conservative. They went for 1 rather than going for 2 or 3 after touchdowns. They punted on 4th and 2s. So they've got a little bit of work to do on the aggressiveness thing.
From the XFL to college football, we'll take a little bit of a turn just like we are into the offseason now. And as I mentioned at the top, talk about the SIS Football Rookie Handbook. We were busy finishing that up around the same time as we were getting ready for the Super Bowl. So I know I tend to be a better sleeper than Nate. So I've kind of recovered since we finished the book. I think Nate's still in his recovery phase, going back from all the editing that went into this. But the Football Rookie Handbook, for those of you who didn't pick it up last year, we did our first edition. And basically the concept there is we put together our sort of February draft board, our pre-combine draft board, and it has all of the players that we did the top 254 last year. This year we got up to 284 of the top players in the country, the guys that we expect to be highly regarded as far as the draft coming around. And we did our first version last year. We had a lot of fun. It was over 600 pages. We actually managed to make a whole bunch of improvements this year, kind of tightening it up, getting even more information into less space, and making it kind of more reader friendly, I think, in a lot of ways, including adding NFL team pages and other stuff. But going back to the whole process, what we really try to do is built on my background with the Saints and with the Browns and what the calendar looks like in terms of putting together a draft board from the team perspective. And aside from everything we're doing from kind of the analytics side, the data collection side at SIS, we try to have a parallel process to that that's a very traditional scouting process and really the way that we go about things. So we start off by identifying prospects early. We come up with our early lists. We're doing spring and summer reports on the players. We're already getting started for next year as far as that stuff goes, just like the teams are really when you look at the way that that's constructed. And we go through scout school throughout September and October with all the video scouts that we bring in every year. And we train those guys up on what you need to be looking for at each position, the different critical factors and positional factors that we look at as we try to project these players forward, and really how NFL teams go about the process of building a draft board. So we went through that whole process. Last year, we built it out to the Football Rookie Handbook, where you get side by side for each player the scouting report, the NFL-style scouting report, along with some of the advanced analytics that we've invented here at SIS over the course of the past few years. This year, we took it to the next level. Besides beefing up the stat pages with our first ever college edition of the total points metric, the one that everybody's come to know and love on the NFL level that's available on sisdatahub.com. For the first time ever, we're making that available to the public within the context of the Football Rookie Handbook. So you can really see kind of a holy grail number of how the guys performed. And we also made a whole bunch of upgrades to our scouting process. So I want to turn it over right there. What can you guys say? Nate Cooper and John Todd, literally the two guys, besides all they do in terms of the data collection operation here, these are literally the two guys that oversaw the entire scouting process. I'm more in the GM role here, sitting in my ivory tower while these guys go hard to work. And do a lot of the dirty work in terms of what goes on around here. You can think of them as scouting directors or personnel directors in terms of the way our operation is constructed. What were some of the things that you guys were pumped about that we improved on for this year in terms of our scouting process?
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned right off was we added 30 more players to the book. That was one thing that we, really wanted to hit hard this year, was try to get more players into the book. And like you mentioned, we were able to get more into this year's book in terms of less pages as well. So that was one of the big things. We actually got over 650 scouting reports from all of our video scouts this year on over 420 players. So we had a lot to work with, and then obviously pared that down to the 284 that got into the book.
And that's a really good point you make there, and that is a reflection on how what we're doing mirrors the way the teams do it. So we start off with preliminary reports on each of the players. You can think of that like the area scout writing their reports. Then depending on how those first reports come through, along with different information from the over-the-top guys, we'll decide who we need to cross-check on, and the cross-checks will get assigned out from there. And that's why 650 reports, but over, what do you say, 400-something players, and then that all gets down to the 284 reports that you see in the book. So there's layers on layers, and even if it's not full reports being written, there are cross-checks going on where we're considering the different reports as well as additional film evaluation that goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as you mentioned too, going through the process, John and I both, split our conferences throughout the country. So we were primarily the cross-checkers for certain conferences. We dipped over and cross paths a little bit here and there. But, we took a look at all 400 and some of these guys to be able to get all these guys into the book. So there was definitely a lot to look at, but we were able to stay consistent with a lot of the teams that we were looking at as well.
And a little bit of the philosophy that we did with the SEC, we borrowed from Mike Lombardi and what we did with the Cleveland Browns when I was there. And that is we actually put both these guys on the SEC as cross-checkers. They split up the SEC, and each of them really cross-checked a division of the SEC. But what that allows us to do is get more of our best eyes in the conferences where the most players are coming out of. So it's just like you treat players. Everybody's going to be traded fairly, not exactly equally all the time. It's the same way when we're evaluating prospects. We don't need to cover the country equally in terms of our coverage. We need to cover it proportionally to where the players are coming out of.
Yeah, definitely. getting both of our eyes on the SEC was definitely a big part. John does a lot of the Alabama type stuff with participation. So we definitely wanted his eyes, more geared towards that side. And then I took the East. So just trying to get our eyes everywhere, but also, proportionally, like you said, was definitely a big part of what we wanted to do.
It ends up with us watching a lot of the same games over and over again. You watch a lot of the same LSU games for me and Georgia games for Nate and everything. But again, that lets you watch these players over and over again. Guys will catch your eye as you watch a game for a third or fourth time when you're trying to focus on somebody else. So it really was a good job of breaking things up between us both. And we got a lot of eyes on everything, but really were able to focus in on some specific teams.
It's definitely nice when you've got that all 22 and, it's the silent film that you've watched and it feels like you've watched it 100 times. At least you don't have to worry about checking in with the scoreboard shot too much. You know the context of the game. You know what the situation was. You've seen it 600 times before. You're just focusing on a different part of the play. So, yeah, kind of the beauty of football there.
Yeah, the 10th time that I watched the Georgia-Notre Dame game, I kind of knew what was going to happen most of the time. So we were good to go there. But then, moving on, like you mentioned, scout school is something that we do for our video scouts. We go through and we kind of teach them the intricacies of every position. One thing that we did different this year was we assign everybody at that position, a player to look at. So we finished running backs. After class, we would assign everybody a running back. They would spend that week going through and basically, scouting and writing up the report on that guy, which allowed us to go through the entire season, getting a lot more reports, done by the end of October, going into November and December, compared to what we did last year.
Which is a good segue to one of the sour tastes, one of the very few sour tastes we had left in our mouth last year. I know, Aaron, you noticed it, and it was the flavor of Nicole Hardman. Who was a late declaration last year. But by accelerating our process this year, one thing we really tried to focus on was making sure that we wouldn't have any lapses in our coverage. So we're hopeful, and unless something crazy happens that we still aren't anticipating, we feel pretty good about our ability to not have any late declarations slip through. But all those early reports really allowed us to get on juniors a lot earlier too.
Yeah, we were very proactive in getting to underclassmen this year. We probably got to about 100 underclassmen before, November even hit, which allowed us to then, once December and January came around, all the guys that we didn't think would, declare, we were able to take a look at those guys as well. And then finally, we went down to the Senior Bowl again this year. It was a great opportunity for the three of us to go down and really get a good look of all the players, because most of those guys are in the book. So going and looking at those guys up close, and basically confirming what we saw on film. It was a great week down there again, just taking a look at all these guys.
Yep, I'm always the one that's going to go straight down to the O-line, D-line, check out my one-on-ones. So I always enjoy that down there. And what do we have? Probably about 20 current or former video scouts that met us down there. That it was almost like an old SIS convention down there, as it feels with different people that I worked with in the NFL too. And as I know Aaron is familiar with, as we'll be out at the Combine later in the month. Aaron, before we get into some of the specific players and the different position groups and start to talk about it, from a process standpoint, from a big picture of the book standpoint, was there anything that you were curious about, maybe from last year to this year, or anything about our process that stuck out as interesting to you?
Well, I do think the good thing about doing so many players is that if guys fall through the cracks, if undrafted free agents suddenly are doing something early in the season, you guys can go and get your scouting reports on those players. And, just because players didn't make the book doesn't mean there aren't scouting reports and stats on them. So that'll be sort of interesting if guys sort of emerge in the preseason. Yeah,
and a really cool thing that we added this year to our process, at our core, we're a data company, and we started doing this kind of old school scouting process. But this year we started actually recording this really meticulously in our database, all the different reports. So now, based on a lot of the work of John Shirley over in our R&D department, formerly one of our video scouts, he was able to basically import not just the finalized reports for each of these players that we use to obviously put into the book, and Brian Reef and the guys like that do an unbelievable job. Andrew Kine putting the book together, the actual in the flesh sort of. But beyond that, what we were able to do is record now all of the individual preliminary reports that are coming in, and that's going to give us a really robust kind of scouting database going forward. So to your point about not just having the players that made the book, our database is going to start to build out, and we're going to start to get a really good sense of also what we're good at and what we're not good at, and how these reports really project forward and where we can refine them and get better. So we're excited about that. All right, guys, without further ado, let's get into some of the players in the book. Let's start with the big money position. John Todd, starting at the top with the quarterbacks. We had two guys, again, tied for the top grade this year. I don't think it'll surprise people to hear that Joe Burrow is the top-ranked quarterback. It might surprise people to learn that Tua Tagovailoa ties him. They're both at a 6.9 in this grade. They're both higher than any quarterback grade we gave last year. That is just shy of being an all-pro, Pro Bowl type grade. It is a win because of type or win with borderline type of starter, right at that 6.9 level. Both these guys were obviously loved. It might surprise you to learn that I was a little bit actually leaning towards Tua for most of the year in terms of I really do like Tua's skill set even better than that of Joe Burrow. But when it came to the end of the year, I wasn't in any position to make an argument with these two guys that Joe Burrow should be anything other than number one, just based on the performance, especially in that semifinal game, was just unbelievable, and what he did to follow through to the national championship. That said, when you look at the traits, Tua is right there with him. John, what can you tell us? What did you see from this position group? Start off with those two guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to kind of go over – this is going to be a big overview of every position. We'll touch on some specifics here and there, but we're going to touch on so the quarterbacks overall is a solid group. Obviously had the two big names of Joe Burrow and Tua up top. Burrow's obviously got one of the greatest college seasons of all time that just finished up. But again, that was only 1 year of college production. We've got to factor that in with everything. He's much more of the rah-rah, vocal, galvanizing leader, the energy and all that stuff. Tua is a different type of leader, but he still has a championship pedigree, the great pocket mobility, awareness, all that stuff. As you said, Matt, the critical and positional factors we graded are actually very similar across both of them. They're 1 and 2 also in a lot of our analytical breakdowns that we had in our rankings. So, yeah, I'm not sure if people realize that, especially without Tua's injury, they'd be neck and neck with us, and even still they're pretty difficult to split.
Did you go back and look at a lot of Burrow's 2018 to look at, the offense changed and the quality of the offensive play calling obviously changed dramatically for LSU, and that's a big part of why his numbers were so much better in 2019. Did you go back to 2018 and look at, whether his raw sort of performance was just as good, even though his numbers weren't as good in his junior year?
We looked at that not only from the film angle, where you see that it's a confluence of factors. It is a better offense and a player that's playing much better with just weapons that are ridiculous around him in that offense. And all of those reasons are reasons why he got better. So it's very hard to parse out how much each of those had to play into what's going on. But beyond the scouting report, Nate Weller actually wrote, we have the analysis that'll be about the first 50 pages of the book, just different analysis pieces that we've done either throughout the year. Maybe we reserved it just for our team clients in the meantime, like as the case with NCAA total points. But in the case of Joe Burrow, something that Nate Weller had just done some research on, trying to delve into the exact question that you're asking. And kind of maybe unexcitingly, the answer seems to be that it is a combination of the factors when you look at it, whether from the scouting perspective or when you start to break down, okay, he started to do a lot more play action stuff this year. Okay, they started to do a lot more pre-snap motion stuff this year. All of those things coincide with an increase in efficiency along with the increase in the tendency. So to answer your question, yeah, we looked at that both ways. And it's a tough one. I would say for me, the even bigger question is going back to Ohio State. This is a guy that's older than Lamar Jackson, I believe. So going back to Ohio State, what went on there for those first couple of years that led to him eventually transferring, obviously not winning the starting job and then transferring? There were obviously talented quarterbacks there in Ohio State too. Still, you think Urban Meyer knows what he's doing in terms of quarterbacks. So that's one question mark in my mind that I still haven't totally been able to get over.
That was another interesting combination of factors there back at Ohio State. We had our scout, Jordan Edwards, who did Joe Burrow's report. Joe Burrow had a broken hand, broken wrist that affected his battle with Dwayne Haskins for the backup job a few years ago, which set him just behind enough where Dwayne could take that and run with it and throw for 50 touchdowns, and certainly won that battle. on the field at least. Joe Burrow rightfully transferred and had a up and down year at LSU his first year, and then blew up. So it's a very interesting story to get to where he got to. And as a lot of people have said before, you really haven't seen the leap from one year to the next. You haven't seen the leap from the backup that he was, third, fourth string, to where he's gotten to now. It's pretty incredible.
The top three picks for me, I think it's Burrow, it's Tua, and it's Chase Young. I don't know what order I would recommend taking them in, but for me, these two top tier quarterbacks really, along with a guy that's absolutely insane. We'll get to him later, but
Yeah.
I would have a hard time passing on those three.
I mean, mock drafts are not definitely the truth, but more and more of them I see people suggesting that a team will trade up to 2 or 3 to take Tua.
Yeah, I do think that the Dolphins at 5 are more his floor than his ceiling, as some people were indicating a couple of months ago.
No, the way that people are talking about his injury at this point, I think even the Dolphins are going to need to trade up to either 2 or 3 if they want to get him.
All right. Anything else on the quarterback front we wanted to talk about?
Yeah, just a quick overview for the rest of the position group that we might get into more down the road. We've got 6 players graded as low-end starters or higher, which is that 6.5 grade or higher. Another handful we project as high-quality backups right behind that. The interesting thing is that we've got 3 kind of groupings among those top 6. Between the first 2 we mentioned already, Justin Herbert and Jordan Love, and then finally Jacob Eason and Jake Fromm. We've each kind of graded in pairs. We can get into how they differ and how the pairs are ranked down the road. But Matt, I know Justin Herbert was somebody that you had looked at. Do you have any thoughts on him?
Yeah, Justin Herbert was somebody that I kept expecting that I wouldn't like. He's not very much like my type as a quarterback. You start to look at some of the traits, and this is a big, athletic guy with a lot of talent who doesn't necessarily always process very well, who doesn't necessarily always handle pressure the best. But honestly, the more I watched him, the more I really did start to like this guy. I think he's got something to his game where I could see it coming together, and it's hard to write him off. The physical skills are outrageous. I mean, it's not quite Josh Allen in terms of the arm strength and the ability to run and the frame and all that kind of stuff. He's frail and thinner than I think people realize when you get to see him up close. You'll notice that, as you guys pointed out to me at weigh-ins. And also, he's a guy that he doesn't have that sort of elite. He's not Cam Newton out there. But that said, he's probably very good or better in a lot of the different traits that you look at. And if he can put it together, if he can get into the right offense for him, if he can get into a situation where he can process, I can see him being a good quarterback. It reminds me a little bit of Jared Goff, and here we are a few years into Jared Goff's career, and I still don't know what he is exactly. He's what my old boss Lombardi would have called a 7-on-7 quarterback, because when there's no pressure, be careful, because that guy can be really good and that guy can ruin you. But when the bullets are really flying, I think he's borderline. So we have him just in that you can win with him range, not quite you can win because of him type quarterback. But I think his low end is sort of being a win in spite of guy. I don't think he's going to hold any teams really, really far back. That said, I don't see just the processing and the polished quarterbacking that you see from Tua or Burrow on the same level with Herbert. So I would hesitate on him in the first, in the top half of the first round, even though I think he ends up, quarterbacks with the talent that he has, they're going to go. He's an interesting guy to juxtapose to Jordan Love, as you were just talking about, because another guy, really interesting, some physical talent there, some really bad performance on the field this year. Not all his fault in terms of what happened with the team there, but certainly he didn't do enough to fix their team this year. So both those players, I think, are sort of in that boom-bust sort of prospect range where you could see it coming together for them, and you can see either of them becoming really good players. There's some question marks before I would get to where I am with Tua or with Burrow. All right, so we talked about the quarterbacks. Compared to last year, more top-heavy, probably not as much depth. There was some really good depth in the quarterback class last year as our grades sort of dug out. But we'll be interested to see how that shakes out over the next few months. It seemed like Joe Burrow was a sure bet going to be the number one pick. It still kind of feels that way, but the more time goes on, the more I could see people really remembering what made people want to tank for Tua in the first place. All right, let's move on to the running back position. Nate, what can you tell us about this position group?
Yeah, the running backs as a whole, it's pretty good depth overall, with a lot of playmakers at the top of the class. basically we have 24 running backs in the book that we had this year. They're all graded 6.2 and higher. So our 6.2 is basically a backup 3-down change of pace guy. So we're seeing 24 guys that could basically, come in, play on all 3 downs, whether they're starting or as a backup. And then, looking at some of these top guys, you got to start off with DeAndre Swift from Georgia. One of the guys that I took a look at, he's a very patient runner. He's elusive, has really good contact balance, and can really make something out of nothing pretty much any time that he gets the ball. So that's the top guy that we had at the running back position this year. Kind of moving on from there, J.K. Dobbins is one guy that I've kind of watched the last couple of years, and he's definitely an exciting guy out of Ohio State. Another, back definitely has a lot of playmaking ability, runs with a low center of gravity, and really can make plays anytime he touches the ball. And then, beyond that, one guy that we could talk about a little bit too, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I know, Matt, you took a look at him. What did you think, watching him throughout the national championship?
Yeah, as his primary evaluator, like you said, he's one of these running backs this year where there are a lot of guys that can contribute. I don't think you want Clyde Edwards-Helaire to be the only running back that you're going to rely on all the time, but he's a really exciting part of either a 1-2 punch or a running back by committee. He's going to struggle in pass protection. He's small, and he's really not good at it. Even when he tries to cut people on film, you'll see him missing a lot. That said, he's an exciting receiver out of the backfield. He's a really good route runner. He's got great contact balance, good vision as a runner, much better in zone than in the gap stuff. And you see with what they did at LSU, they asked him to do a lot of zone stuff out of shotgun, which I think would be the fit for him on the next level. I see him as, like I said, not an every down starter for a team, but a guy that in a sort of running back by committee or a 1-2 punch sort of backfield, I think he's a really excited player to have. Does some things that are exciting in terms of reminding me of different guys I've been around that change things for you. Some good comps for him, I would say. I mentioned in the book, Giovanni Bernard is one name that came to mind when watching him. Another one that I heard that somebody that I think is somewhere in between Giovanni Bernard and Ray Rice is probably a fair comp for what he brings as a runner. Really like him, really exciting guy. And then you said 24 guys, 6'2" or above. That just underscores what we find about running backs every year, which is they exist.
Here's the thing about running backs don't matter. Running backs don't matter doesn't mean that running backs aren't great athletes. And running backs don't matter doesn't mean that running backs don't work hard. In many ways, the whole running backs don't matter concept, which is a little exaggerated. I mean, there are differences between running backs. But it comes down to the idea that there are too many of them that are good. It's that there isn't a differentiator. And that seems to be what you're finding with this class, that there isn't a differentiator between the top guy and like the 10th guy or the 15th guy, that they all have talent. There's lots of guys with talent. There's lots of guys who are useful.
Right. It's not to say that these guys can't be difference makers, but it's to say that there's multiple guys that can, and just the kind of the economics of it. That's what we're talking about there. I hate that name, running backs don't matter, but the concept when you sort of water it down is a fair one. Anybody who's ever been in a draft room before knows when you get late in the draft, you're still going to have a lot of stickers up there, magnets, whatever you're doing these days, that are going to be showing running backs and wide receivers because those guys exist.
And of course, you get them in the late rounds. They help you on special teams too.
All right, let's move it forward and talk about wide receivers. What did we find in terms of the wide receivers this year, John?
So wide receivers have obviously long been regarded as the best position in this year's draft, and our rankings match up with that in terms of the top-end talent and the depth as well. We've got 8 players graded as future first, number 1 and number 2 receivers on a championship caliber team, with Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb receiving our elite, elusive 7.0 grades. Judy's route running and separation are just special traits, and Lamb's catch radius and playmaking with the ball in his hands are special traits as well. And he's got a much more well-rounded skill set, I believe. And that's what makes them our top 2 receivers and really separate them from a lot of other prospects in this class too.
Yep. Bryce Rossler is an Oklahoma native, and he hates mostly everything. So the fact that he has studied CeeDee Lamb as much as he did, and he was willing to throw that 7.0 grade there, I think tells you all you need to know about what you can expect from him as a prospect.
Absolutely. And Judy's got the slender build, but the after catch ability, the route running, the way he sets up receivers with his hips, dead leg jukes and everything like that. He's really got the great ability to separate. But one of the questions that you're going to have with Tua, with a lot of these Alabama receivers, is they're running wide open a lot. There's not a lot of contested catches to be had. You got a great quarterback throwing to them. You got a great offensive scheme that you're playing in where guys are running open a lot of room to work in. So that's something to take into account for sure. But let's not kid ourselves. Judy's got a lot of skills that help out that offense himself.
Yeah, it's nice when you have Ruggs out there running 4-2, taking the top off the defense. But Judy, for my money, I can't think maybe back to Amari Cooper. I can't think of a better route runner coming out than Judy. And that would be the last guy that came to mind as just a wow route runner coming out.
But this is a deep class too, right? I mean, there's going to be starting wide receivers coming out of the 3rd and 4th rounds this year.
100%. That's really the special area in this class. We have the top end guys. Every draft has some top end guys like that. But the special part of this class is that we've got about 15 guys rated as role playing third receivers who should see plenty of playing time. Coming as slot guys, coming in the outside, coming that 11 personnel. We have 3 receivers on the field that the NFL is moving so forward to these days. Those guys are pretty much treated as starting level players these days. And the depth there of all the players that we have graded in that range really make this crop receiver special this year. And there's a lot of players that we like down there too that we can't wait to get into.
Yeah, all these young guys growing up, that spread has just been a thing for them as they were growing up, as opposed to, for me, where it just has become a thing towards the tail end of my playing career. I can't imagine growing up in Pop Warner, but now I think we're starting to see the results with some of these quarterbacks that we see, with some of these receivers that we see, how polished they are at really understanding how to play football at a high level because of having all the experience in these systems and not just stock blocking all the time. All right, let's keep it moving. Tight ends. What do you find about the tight end position, John?
So tight end's an interesting group this year. We're really lacking some difference makers up top, but we've got a lot of intriguing skill sets down further that teams are going to value a lot differently. So we've got, we'll get into the breakdown between what a Y tight end is, what H tight end is. We got about 4 Y tight ends in the top 10 and 6 H's, but most of them graded out as an either or type of player. Not really too many guys that can do it all, which is what some teams are looking for, but you can find something. It's kind of what you see is what you get. Different teams will value that stuff differently. You got Y tight ends being more in line, usually more better blockers, but not always. H's are the move tight ends, the receiving tight ends, put them in space, split them to the slot, sometimes hide them in their blocking schemes and everything, and dynamic receivers downfield. So got some good balance there between the two, but a lot of guys are kind of either or prospects, at least in this stage.
All right, and then flipping it forward to the offensive line. Last year, I thought we accurately pointed out that there were a lot of guys that were going to be available on the second day, that were going to be starters for teams, that were going to be making differences in terms of the way that they were built up front. Do we see that same kind of depth that we had last year in the offensive line group this year?
A little bit, I think so. It's kind of a mixed bag this year. We're lacking some quality starting caliber left tackle types and some really high-end interior linemen this year, but there's a number of good right tackle options. Plenty of lower-end interior linemen and guys to be graded in that 6'4", 6'5", 6'6" grade that you can maybe find better options in a few years, but for now they can come in, they can contribute, they'll battle for positions on the starting first team and everything. Andrew Thomas is our top offensive lineman overall for us. He's 6'9", and he's also the only solid starting left tackle guy, the one that we project to the best to the left side.
And we should be clear, you mentioned this a little before. When we say solid starting, we mean solid starter on a championship level team. So it's not just, this guy started, therefore he's a solid starter level player. Throw that grade on him. This is saying a 6'9" grade. A 6'9" grade. He's going to be upgrading what we're doing in terms of the offensive line.
Absolutely, that 6'7" to 6'9" grade is what teams are ideally looking for. Guys that aren't going to be necessarily replacement level starters in a few years. These are kind of your bookend guys, and especially Andrew Thomas being the only one of these tackles that we graded as a left tackle on the best side. Best side for him is for sure our top lineman. We've got some great options on the right side too. A few guys that people haven't heard of. Most people that do know, Jedrick Wills, Tristan Wirfs, a lot of guys like that. Prince Tega Wanogo is a guy up there that I don't think a lot of people might have. Got a really interesting backstory. Moved to America from Nigeria. Didn't play football until he was 16. Started his career at Auburn as a defensive end. And we really think he's grown into a really solid player who can play on the left or right. But again, he's a guy who will probably project better to the right side.
Awesome stuff. All right, we're going to take a quick break now that we finished up kind of the offensive breakdown. We'll talk about the Football Rookie Handbook and then come back in, round it out with this defensive conversation. Sports Info Solutions brings you the second annual edition of the SIS Football Rookie Handbook, with scouting reports and statistical breakdowns on over 280 college football players who are likely to be drafted or signed as rookie free agents in 2020. New features this year include unique and informative NFL team pages, research deep dives by the SIS R&D team, and, for the first time ever, the NCAA version of the SIS flagship football statistic, Total Points. At Sports Info Solutions, we collect and analyze college football players like it has never been done before. Whether you're a film junkie, an aspiring analyst, or just looking for the most comprehensive information on what your NFL team's rookies did while they were playing college football, this book has what you are looking for and more. Michael Lombardi, former NFL general manager and three-time Super Bowl winner, said, "This book is the closest fans will get to reading real NFL scouts reports, because it is detailed reporting with a complete understanding of what it takes to play in the NFL. Well done." John Park, the manager of research and strategy for the Indianapolis Colts, said, "Scouts matter because not everything that counts can be counted, and relevant data matters since not everything that can be counted counts. With that said, SIS creates relevant football data that matters." Please check out the SIS Football Rookie Handbook. It is available wherever you get books. You can get it on acta.com, ACTA.com. You can get it on Amazon.com, or you can find it at Barnes & Noble. That's the SIS Football Rookie Handbook, comprehensive scouting and analytics guide, all of the 2020 NFL draft prospects, brought to you by Sports Info Solutions. All right, coming right back from the break, we should point out before we get into the defense, something that John kind of alluded to earlier. We will be coming back 2 weeks from today, coming at you live from the Combine. Me and Aaron will be out in Indianapolis, and we'll be doing a little bit more of the deep dives. John's sort of been teasing a few positions that he has more to say about, but he's trying to keep us from going over an hour today. So we just wanted to kind of tease that out, let you know in 2 weeks we'll be circling back and getting even more in-depth on some of these prospects and some of the Football Rookie Handbook preview once it's out actually on bookshelves by the time the Combine starts. But for now, let's get back into it and let's talk about the defensive line. Oh, I think this is a place for me to start if we're talking about defensive linemen, because we got to talk about Chase Young. Aaron, this is one of the most outrageous defensive line prospects I've ever seen. He's in the same sort of sentence with guys that have come out recently, like Myles Garrett, like Jadeveon Clowney. He is that sort of a prospect, just outrageous athleticism. He's got great size. He's got almost a 7 or above for almost every factor grade. So that's a very good, he's a plus amongst the NFL players at every factor. And as a pass rusher and in terms of a get off, he was an excellent grade for me. I think he's going to walk into the NFL and be a premier pass rusher right away. I think the craziest thing that I can say about him, and I do understand how crazy this is to say after watching Nick Bosa basically have the best performance of any player in the Super Bowl, period, on either team. And that is that watching each of them and being able to grade them each over the last 2 years, Nick Bosa, it's hard to find a hole in his game, and these are different players. But in terms of the athletic upside and what you can bring in terms of just being a pass rush monster that you have to account for, Chase Young is an even better prospect than Nick Bosa was. Now, that's not to say he's going to be the defensive rookie of the year and make crazy plays to affect the Super Bowl next year. I think that would be asking a lot. It might be more reasonable to expect him to have a same sort of impact that Myles Garrett has had over the first non-helmet throwing years of his career. But overall, this guy's just an outrageous prospect. The get off, the pass rush. He's a special player, and he's pretty damn good in run defense too.
Now, from what I understand, I mean, you're right about Young. If it wasn't for the fact that quarterback is by far the most important position in the game, Young would be the number one pick easily. And every mock draft that I see, basically, wherever they have Young listed, it's either second or third, and the comment is usually something along the lines of duh. But from what I've read elsewhere, the rest of the edge rusher class is not that good compared to other years. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so we obviously have at the top end, it starts and ends with Chase Young. We've got a few other 3-down starters in there just behind that. But we've got over 10 guys that project as either third down pass rush specialists, 2-down starting edge setters against the run, or some on-off ball versatile alignment chess piece type guys. You got Zach Bond and Anthony Jennings, guys that can do a little bit of both. So it's full of different guys with various skill sets, kind of a beauty is in the eye of the beholder types. We feel a lot of these guys are going to come in, make an impact after getting drafted in the middle rounds. Maybe not your 3-down starters that can do everything, but there's a number of guys that in the right scheme, hopefully if they get taken in the right defense and get used correctly to their strengths, we think there's a ton of different skill sets here that teams will find and be able to use correctly.
But there's fewer of those kind of slam dunk first round edge rushers that we see go each year.
Right. There's definitely not a top end fallback option if you're not one of the first couple teams drafting and you miss out on Chase Young. You're not going to be able to come back in the top 10 and take the next best guy or anything.
I don't know if there is another 3-down starting edge day one walking onto the field and going to start for you, as a rookie. I think there are guys that'll grow into that role based on our grading scale, but Chase Young's really the only guy where,
Right.
You plug and play.
Last year, if you didn't get Bosa, there was Brian Burns and there was Josh Allen and there was Cleveland Farrell, and this year you don't have that.
Yeah, that's fair to say. Although there'll probably be guys that come around and surprise us.
Always are.
And what about as we stay defensive line and edge? What about moving to the inside?
Yeah, bumping inside. The interior D-line is actually pretty thin up top for us. We've got about 10 guys that project as your versatile reserve backup types, that 6'2" grade, who can rotate through, play from different alignments. We've got a lot of those guys this year.
All right, but tell me about the big sexies.
The big sexies are Derek Brown for sure is another one of those guys that reaches that 7-0 mark for us. He's the star of the interior D-line class. Combination of play strength and agility is pretty crazy for his size. Showed it all through the year at Auburn. He's a fantastic athlete. And then Javon Kinlaw is a guy, explosive athlete. We saw him down in Mobile for the Senior Bowl, dominated the practices at the Senior Bowl for the first couple of days, and then suspiciously shut it down right after that. Somebody might have gotten in his ear and said, "You've made enough money here, young man. Take it easy a little bit." So
yeah, Aaron, he looked like he did not belong at the Senior Bowl. He was just absolutely manhandling guys, and it certainly seemed like he made his money. And they said, "Okay, son, you can sit this out now." On the topic of Derek Brown, I wanted to bring him up because he's somebody that we actually took a quick look at in scout school very early in the year, and I was not enamored by. So I'm curious, just as you went through the cross-check process and really understanding his game. Listen, it was obvious when you saw him. The guy's an absolute freak. You don't see guys that big, and he's kind of like built in proportion in a way that you don't expect an interior defensive lineman to be built. Like he kind of just looks like a larger version of a regular proportion human, which is kind of crazy when you get to be a guy that big. And then looking at the advanced stats, he crushed it all year long. So when we looked at him early in the year and I saw a guy with all kinds of potential, but I didn't think he had put it together yet, did I see something that really developed into a finished product over the course of the year? Did I miss something that was going on there? Or do you still have some questions about his ability to really put it together and transfer it into, I guess, not with a 7.0 grade?
No, yeah, we think he's got the total package. And he's a guy, conversely, we were talking about Joe Burrow, who last year was a bit of a lesser prospect and then blew up this year. Derek Brown's a guy who absolutely could have come out last year, been a first-round pick, and was highly regarded and decided to come back for his senior year and had a good first half of the year and really turned it on in the second half too. I mean, he really didn't have too many down games. He was doing some incredibly freaky stuff for somebody his size, making interceptions and fumble recoveries and sacks and just disrupting the backfield in multiple different ways that you don't really see too much from interior linemen. He's
an exciting weapon. I think a team will love having him as a force in there, whether it's 3 technique, 5 technique, whatever you want to do with him, move him around. He's gonna cause some issues.
And that's important too. Those like interceptions and passes defensed and stuff tell you a surprisingly amount about defensive linemen when they're that agile that they can get those.
That's something in your sexier.
Yep. Which we use for edge rushers, not defensive tackles, but I don't see any reason why they're not telling for defensive tackles as well.
All right, let's keep it moving forward and spin it to those off-ball linebackers. Nate, what can you tell us about the off-ball LB class this year?
Yeah, this year, all of our off-ball guys, it's pretty top-heavy with this position, and there's not really a lot of depth. So if you're looking for linebackers, you really want to go in those first couple of rounds and go get yourself a good one. Beyond that, you're going to be looking at a lot of special teams guys probably. But the guys that we're going to talk about, Kenneth Murray, from Oklahoma is a guy super rangy, plays sideline to sideline. Against the run, he can navigate through the trash, get through the line, make plays, and then against the pass, he's a guy that can be good enough for you in coverage and also blitz the passer as well. So he's a guy that is kind of the top of our board, in terms of Mike linebackers, and he's a guy that just he's usually all over the field when you're watching him play. And then a couple other guys that are fun to watch. Isaiah Simmons from Clemson. He's our top will linebacker. Basically plays everywhere on the defensive side. He's one of those guys that, you can put him in the box, you can play him on the back end, you can put him in the slot, has really good instincts, and is super rangy as well. So he's a guy that's definitely fun to watch for that Clemson defense.
On the data center version of the national championship that ESPN showed, they had an awesome graphic. They used the data that we provide the data for ESPN for all their college football coverage. They had an awesome graphic that showed him lining up everywhere from free safety all the way down inside the box at different spots. So he's truly, I think, as versatile a player as we've seen in a while. Somebody his size lining up on the back end, literally ability to cover the slot, ability to play in space up on the first level, even rush the passer.
So even though he's a linebacker listed as, he's kind of sounds like this year's Derwin James.
He's very different than Derwin James. Physically, he looks more like, what's my guy, Edmonds in Buffalo, just being a big, long type of linebacker like that. But in terms of the versatility, I think you've got it right on. This guy literally was lining and playing on the back end, playing in the deep coverage zones of cover two at times throughout the year. It's just something that, I don't remember. I saw Darius Leonard for the Colts line up at corner in cover two, and I thought that was pretty interesting. I think Simmons has the ability to almost literally line up at any position on the field.
Yeah, I think one thing, some people will say that he's kind of positionless. He doesn't have an actual position. They're not going to know where to put him. But I think smart NFL teams are going to draft this guy, and they're going to.
That's not a thing. That's not a thing anymore. We don't know.
Zion Williams is positionless.
Yeah, exactly. you put him different places on every down, and if the guy can play, you do things with him. We're not in the tweener area. We're in the chess piece area. We're not in the tweener era. We're in the chess piece era.
I definitely agree. I'm taking this guy and I'm playing him wherever I want to on the back end, wherever he wants to on the back end, and he's going to make plays wherever he's at.
And the thing is, you don't even have to – it's not a projection. He's shown mentally that he can handle this within the scope of Clemson's defense, lining up all the positions against all the sorts of athletes. It's not even a projection, really, and I love what you said there, Aaron.
And then one final guy at linebacker that I watched kind of late in the process that was a really fun watch was Marcus Bailey from Purdue. He's an interesting guy. He actually tore his ACL after week 2 this season. So had to watch a lot of 2018 tape. And in his first 2 games of the season, he's really fun to watch. He's a definite leader on the defensive side, always pointing out things, making calls, and really rangy and instinctual on the defensive side of the ball. So he was definitely a fun watch, and actually came out with a pretty high grade on him. But unfortunately, with the injury, probably won't go as high as we have him graded. But he'll be a fun guy to watch at the next level.
Then he'll be somebody's steal, man.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And that's a great segue, kind of talking about the injuries. I have a reminder that as we grade the players in the book, we're grading them based on what they are as players. So we're not really taking into account injuries as it pertains to their grades and what's going on there. These grades should pertain to how well we expect them to perform by the first game of their second season in the league. And that's what the grades specifically mean. That said, our injury expert, John Veros, I'm sure many of the listeners know, we have an extensive injury charting operation that goes on here, and John Veros is at the helm of it. And one thing that we added also for the book this year, in addition to our injury designations, which were a part of the book last year, in terms of guys that are currently injured or pose a long-term injury risk, so that you can take that into account the same way a team would with a sticker on the magnet in terms of the injury or character risk. We get that, but then also John put his head together with Nate Weller and a little bit of this guy over here too. And we developed an injury section of the book that breaks down kind of around the game of football, where we can expect to see more injuries, where there are fewer injuries, where the risk exists, and gives some more insight and analysis in terms of how to understand the way injuries are affecting the game. And included in that, of course, the number of games missed due to injury for players on college teams. So really interesting analysis there to check out in the book. And even though these grades, I think it's an advantage that the grades don't take into account injuries, because you can evaluate things separately. You can understand what the guy is as a player. And to your point, Aaron, if you're finding a steal, you'll be understanding exactly how much risk you're taking on for the sort of talent that you're potentially going to be rewarded by. All right, enough about me talking about injuries. Let's get back to the players on the field. And what can you tell me about the DBs in this year's draft?
Yeah, starting with corner, it's a pretty top-heavy class. There's some good depth overall. We actually came out with a ton of new number 4 corners, guys that are going to provide a lot of help on special teams, things like that. We have 36 corners that are in the book this year. This is a little bit of a step up. This is kind of the big step that we took in, adding 30 more players to the book with the big depth that we have at this position. But there's 3 guys to me that kind of stand out. There's 3 different tiers at the top end. Number 1 is, Jeffrey Okudah from Ohio State. He's another one of our 7-0 guys, a guy that he's, just a really good athlete, reactive, quick, confident in his play, really good man coverage. He's a guy that, is being talked about as, those top 3 or 4 picks quite a bit. So he's a guy that, if you're really looking for a corner, he's the one to definitely go get at the top end of the draft. Beyond that, the next tier, Jeff Gladney from TCU, definitely a fun guy to watch. He's really smooth, quick in his transition, in and out of his back pedal, and definitely has the speed to really close on receivers down the field. So he's a good one coming out of TCU. And then kind of the next tier beyond that, Dane Jackson out of Pitt, played down at the Senior Bowl, looked really good. He's a guy, he's super physical. You put him at the line of scrimmage, he's going to press receivers all day and really get in your face. And he's a guy that, if you watch the Senior Bowl practices, really shut down some receivers with his physical kind of play. So those are the kind of, 3 different tiers there for corner. But yeah, there's a lot of depth at that position.
Obviously, last year in the book, we went out on a limb. We gave a high grade to Nick Needham. He was our number 4 corner, a starting level grade, and he ended up starting a good portion of the season and performing pretty well. Total points liked him also. Are there any corners that maybe off the beaten path that we are looking at this year that could be the Nick Needham of 2020?
There's, a couple solid sleeper kind of corners out there, but it's interesting that you mentioned Nick Needham. I have a note here for the safety position. When we get to safety here, there's a guy that we may have found that possibly could be in that Nick Needham discussion. A guy, we had our scouts watch all these guys, came back with a really super high grade. I took a look at him and definitely almost confirmed what he had. We have a guy, in there at the top 5, but I'm not going to spoil that just yet. I'll leave that for whenever the people buy the book and come back to listen again.
Ooh, okay. So you'll have to come back at least in 2 weeks if you don't buy the book already and find out who our sleeper safety
is. Our sleeper safety invited to the combine?
He is.
Okay,
wow,
so we could talk about him in a couple of weeks when we're at the combine.
Absolutely. So it's a little step up from Nick Needham, not being invited, but we're definitely happy to see that he was invited to the combine. So
I will note, just looking at one mock draft that I just happen to have on my screen right now, Chad Reuters over at NFL.com, he only has 2 cornerbacks in his top 40. So it's more of a depth year for cornerbacks like you're talking about rather than a top year for cornerbacks. With the Okudah obviously stands out.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's those couple of guys that could go in that first round, first round and a half, and then there's going to be a lot of corners that are going to go, the back half of the second round through, the end of the draft. That'll be definitely difference makers and playmakers, at every level of the field.
Thank you guys so much for coming on. It's been a lot of fun talking about some of the different position groups going into the Football Rookie Handbook this year. As we mentioned, we will be back in 2 weeks coming at you from the Combine, talking to you guys more in depth, going in on some of these players as we get to know them better and better throughout the pre-draft process. Aaron, I think we've got something special cooked up for the listeners next week.
Next week, we're going to talk about teams that can break out in 2020. We're going to look at the FO Reader Awards question about which team is most likely to break out and be a playoff contender in 2020. And we're going to talk about which teams we think are most likely to break out, turn things around to be contenders in 2020.
Tune in, check it out. It was a lot of fun when we did that last year. And I'm curious to see which teams I'm going to be diving into this year as we research for that episode. On that note, we will sign off and get out of here. Thank you to all of our listeners. As always, you guys are what makes the show go. We hope you enjoyed this kind of behind-the-scenes look at the SIS Football Rookie Handbook. As always, please help spread the word about Off the Charts. Tell your friends, subscribe, rate, and please write reviews. Let us know what we're doing well. And most importantly, let our bosses know why you guys like listening. That's huge for us. You can hit us up on Twitter at sportsinfo_SIS and at FB Outsiders. And as we've mentioned 100 times at this point, keep your eyes open for the 2020 Football Rookie Handbook. You can pre-order it now on actasports.com. That's ACTA sports.com, or on Amazon. That's AMAZON, if you couldn't figure that one out. The Football Rookie Handbook, we put a ton of work into it. And besides all the awesome scouting reports, I think the analytics and the new sections that we added, the NFL team pages specifically, looking at the team needs based on total points breakdowns, and some of the team overviews where we're looking at your different EPA and different personnel groupings and in different defensive formations and with and without motion and all kinds of other interesting stuff that analytics people love to look at. So whether you're a scout, whether you're an analyst, hopefully you're both, check out the 2020 Football Rookie Handbook. For my co-host, Aaron Schatz, our producer, Justin Stein, and our guests, John Todd and Nate Cooper, I'm Matt Manocherian, and thank you for joining us for the latest episode of the Off the Charts Football Podcast.